Colors and archetypes in every set are supposed to be balanced, but does one archetype in Amonkhet outperform the others? I believe the answer is yes, with one archetype vastly outperforming the others. But first, if you haven't already seen my video about draft archetypes in Amonkhet, here's a brief rundown. There are 6 main themes in Amonkhet. Zombies, which uses strength and numbers to win. Embalm, which brings your creatures back from the graveyard late game. Cycle Discard, which draws you cards until you reach late game. -1 counters, which weakens your opponent's creatures while slowly strengthening your own. Exert Beatdown, which is the most aggressive theme in the set. And lastly, Ramp, which gives you extra mana early on. In order to see which of the archetypes has the advantage, let's look at the strengths and weaknesses of each archetype. We'll first look at Black-White Zombies. This archetype has a lot of cards that work well together, and the longer the game goes, the stronger the creatures get. But while this archetype has a lot of synergy, it lacks evasion and bombs to end the game. With enough removal, it can still push through your opponent's creatures, but winning with this archetype isn't as easy as some of the others. You'll have a much easier time closing out games with Blue, White, and Bomb, which has a ton of heavy flyers. This deck shines very late game, but it's a bit slow early game. It's a solid archetype, but since it's vulnerable to aggressive decks, there are more reliable archetypes in this set. The next archetype is Cycle Discard. Like Black-White Zombies, this archetype has a ton of synergy, and unlike Black-White Zombies, this one has blue flyers to end the game. And while I do think this archetype is very close to being the best one, it lacks some flexibility in that it needs key cards to defend early game. Simply cycling every turn until you reach late game just won't cut it against aggressive decks. So with that said, let's move on to the next archetype, -1 counters. This archetype is quite strong as well, as it can produce some of the biggest creatures in the set. But Amonkhet is a set where the field locks up really quickly. It feels a lot like Shadows and Eldritch, where both players had strong creatures by turn 4, and no one wanted to be the first one to attack, and matches often came down to who had the most evasion. Likewise, having big ground creatures alone won't guarantee the win, and since flyers are almost non-existent in this archetype, I feel that it may fall short against decks with good defense and evasion. Moving on to the next archetype, Exert Beatdown. When all goes well, this archetype is very powerful and very quick to finish off games, and if your opponent tries to block your exerted creatures, they will lose a lot of their own in doing so. While this archetype might seem unstoppable at times, it is highly vulnerable to red removal. Magma Spray and Blazing Volley, which are both commons, will decimate most exerted creatures. So if none of these archetypes are the best one, which is the best archetype? I am very confident that the best archetype in the set is Tribal Cats. Okay, Tribal Cats is not the best archetype, but I wish it were. The actual best archetype in the set, in my opinion, is Green-Blue Ramp. And before everyone goes and dislikes the video for disagreeing, let me explain why I think this archetype is more reliable than the others. First of all, both green and blue have access to solid blockers to withstand aggressive decks. And while your opponent is focused on pushing through your ground defense, you are focused on producing mana to quickly drop your bomb flyers. With blue having the strongest flyers in the set, you'll be able to wreck your opponent's life total long before they'll find a way around your ground creatures. And in addition to having access to the strongest flyers, this archetype also has access to the strongest ground creatures, thus giving you an alternate path to victory. And as if this archetype couldn't get any better, green is also the only color able to produce mana in this set, so you'll be able to comfortably splash a third color while other archetypes will strain to do the same. Now, I'm not saying you should try to force this archetype. As with any set, the archetype you go with depends on what you're getting from the packs. And just because the other archetypes seem more vulnerable, it doesn't mean they can't win all their matches. But what I am saying is that when you play Weaver of Currents on turn 3, and then play Angler Drake on turn 4, most decks simply won't have an answer to that. If you want to see more Amonkhet videos, you can let me know by subscribing below. And let me know in the comments which archetype you think is the best in Amonkhet. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope you have a great day.